Hi, I'm Stephanie Arell, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about mourning, the mourning process, the concept of grieving, in a very particular framework related to the ways that we avoid mourning. So it's more about paying attention to not grieving and why we wouldn't grieve, or like certain things we do to avoid grieving. It's very technical, actually, but I thought it might be helpful. And I've been thinking about it in relationship to really the amount of physical illnesses I see people having since COVID. And I think that the question that I have been pondering relates to the amount of loss that people endured during COVID, both in terms of time, in terms of their schooling, in terms of people and loved ones that people lost, or people who know people, experiences that went unanswered in that time period. And also, so many people I know have changed their personal habits in COVID and are still trying to figure out how to live not as they did before, but in a way that's maybe more healthy than the way that they did during COVID in terms of coping mechanisms, in terms of how alone we were during that time, especially if you lived in an urban area. And that's like the opposite of what we experience every day. I live in New York City, near New York City. So what the difference was during COVID than it is now. So the question then is, after you've had an experience of loss, there always has to be a mourning process. There has to be some aspect of grieving. When people talk about having closure with something, usually that indicates that they want to stop feeling the sensation of grief that emerges in relationship to that experience. And I think there has to be rituals around grieving and processes for grieving. And I'll talk about that in a later video, because what I want to talk about right now are things that impede the grieving process. And I'm specifically drawing from Judith Herman, and I'm referencing 3. She puts these in terms of fantasies that get in the way of our mourning. So one is the revenge fantasy, one is the forgiveness fantasy, and one is the compensation fantasy. Now, these fantasies are particularly related to when someone's done us wrong. Again, these have to do with enduring a human to human or a trauma enacted by human design more than they do something like COVID that we could consider it more natural. So this is the human to human contact, but ways that we avoid mourning. So for instance, in revenge, this is like the moment when there is I'm going to get back at this person, right? So instead of saying, I've lost this person and I need to sit here and cry for a while, or I need to have some kind of ritual that marks the loss so that I can move into a new stage of life, there's a kind of obsessive over involvement in thinking about, how do I get back at this person? How do I create a situation where they endure pain just like I'm enduring pain? Or even an imagination of that this person's going to hurt just as much as I hurt, or that I hope that something bad happens to them. It's a pretty human phenomenon, but what I do think is that is a way for us to not feel the pain and grieve what was lost in relationship to that particular human contact. The compensation fantasy is pretty prevalent, I would say, in American society, at least, in the manifesting in the culture of us suing each other, right? So the idea is, I've had some loss. I broke my leg and it affected my wedding, or someone hit my car and now I'm going to sue them because of, loss and damages is what would be said. So it's in that framework of thinking about compensation. So the belief that I'll feel better if I'm paid for or I receive something as a result of this loss. The idea is that the compensation makes up for somehow the feelings and will fix the feelings. And that's false. because the feelings will remain. And you know, what's in my mind the most as I'm thinking about this, and when I teach it in my classes, I often think about the documentary related to Epstein. Now, I could not watch all of this. And in fact, to reference back to COVID, I'm pretty sure it came out during COVID, and I tried to watch it, but couldn't. And part of the reason why had to do with the way that I thought presentation of the girls who had endured this harm as a result of Epstein's system and choices and sexual aggression, that they were sort of presented as, in my mind, being already or being taken care of in the documentary, which I think was false. And what I wondered was if the producers of the documentary offered them resources, psychological resources, to really share what they had gone through emotionally and offer them places to grieve what was lost, which many of them articulated on the documentary. My guess is no, but I don't know that. There is a chance that talking on this documentary allowed for these girls, mostly girls and women, if they prefer to be called women, that it offers them a way of connecting with other people that endured the same harm and abuse. I should call it also abuse. And to know that they're not alone. But I'm not sure if the act of being in a public documentary that was structured in the way that that documentary was structured offered them any kind of opportunity to grieve or to recover from what happened to them. Maybe they were compensated somehow by the acknowledgement in being on the documentary, but did it really answer or speak to the amount of pain and grief that was suffered as a result of that? That documentary isn't a precise example, but it starts to raise some of the questions about compensation or getting back at somebody about addressing or identifying the perpetrator. And those experiences alone are not enough to help us go through the psychological process of grief, and in fact can get in the way of the process in grief. And I think that's really what's important, is they're not substitutions. The third one is particularly concerning to me because it's the fantasy of forgiveness. And since I do work in theology, it's something that I'm interested in and something that I'd like to explore more. But for right now, what I'll say is that when we have something happen to us that's really negative, especially by somebody we love, and there is a kind of quick pass to forgiveness or an encouragement by others to forgive that person, that can be dangerous in and of itself, because it, again, can be a method of infringing on or interfering with the grieving process. And it's so important that we grieve. And forgiveness means a lot of different things to a lot of people. That could be a video in and of itself, and maybe we'll do that at some point. But the idea is moving from this was a wrong that I endured at the hands of another person to I forgive that person, or to an encouragement by another larger body that one should forgive. Those are dangerous steps that get in the way of the emotional process of grief. So those are three mechanisms that people use to avoid feeling loss. Loss is very, very painful. It does not just disappear. One crying fest does not alleviate the feelings of loss. In fact, the feeling of loss may last forever. But by grieving it, by acknowledging it, by feeling into loss, that's the best way to move forward and to be able to function in the future. And finding ways of revenge or believing that payment or some kind of compensation can help, or by quickly moving to forgiveness, we don't honor our most deepest needs for weeping and grieving wounds.